We're here today with congressional candidate Nate Cain in West Virginia.
God's country.
God's country.
Definitely.
Nate, thank you for having us and welcoming us to your home in this great state of West Virginia.
It's a great place to live, definitely.
I understand you welcome transplants.
Yes, you know, when I first decided to run, that was one of the things that was very different than what I expected. I thought that as I went around to the different 27 counties of this district that I would be met with skepticism and, you know, people, you know, maybe having some prejudice about me because, you know, I wasn't born here. You know, I was born in California, and but we moved here 2.5 years ago, and I didn't move here with an intent to run for office. You know, let me make that clear. I had no desire to run for office, and
You're a sensible man.
Part of me still has no desire to run for office, but we moved here 2.5 years ago because we had gone through, you know, pretty traumatic experience, you know, in Maryland after I blew the whistle with the FBI, and we got raided in our home, and you know, when you have that happen, especially when you're being, you know, kept, you know, detained in your living room, when they're in all of your bedrooms. You know, they're going through, you know, I was laughing when I, you know, heard Donald Trump talking about, you know, the FBI searching his wife's panty drawers. They did the same thing in our house.
Wow, now wait a minute. There's going to be a lot of people watching this who are not aware of the background. Can we just take it back to how you got there in the first place?
Sure. So I've worked in cybersecurity for about 26 years now, I think. And I was, most of that has been with the Department of Defense. I started off in the United States Army. That's where I learned my trade. I got out of the Army and ended up going to work for DISA as a contractor, and then eventually was hired.
DISA?
Defense Information Systems Agency.
Okay.
So I worked on a system that did all of the classified emails handling for the National Capital Region. And so I got into some really cool, you know, cybersecurity related work, and it progressed, you know, my career. But eventually I got hired with the United States Navy as a civil servant, and I was working in San Diego at the time as a contractor, and they wanted me to go to Japan and be their information systems security officer. So I went to Japan and worked in Yokosuka, and then I left there after 3 years, went to Hawaii, and that was a wonderful experience. Yeah, so in fact I used to be able to, I had the best commute in the world. I would get in my kayak and kayak across Pearl Harbor every day to get to work.
Wow.
And you paid to do that, right? They didn't pay you.
No, they paid me to do that. Yeah, so yeah, the only problem with Hawaii was that the cost of living there was so extremely high that, you know, we were never going to be able to own a house, and I was honestly concerned about, you know, my kids' prospects of, you know, future jobs. They were all, you know, in high school and junior high at the time. So I knew, you know, if we needed to make kind of a settle and find a final place to live. And I had a feeling I was going to be coming back to DC at some point, just because this is where the centralization of all federal jobs are. And so I got a job working for Marforce Cyber, that's Marine Forces Cyber Command, and it was exciting. It was basically, I was trained to be a part of what they call a black team, and or DCI hunt team. So we would go in when they had belief that there was a hacker in the network, and we would end up going in and basically finding the hacker and removing them out of the network. So you know, it was everywhere I've lived, there's something that I've gained from it. You know, just in Japan, it was interesting because the Japanese people, I remember sitting down and talking to them and saying, hey, you know, what is the difference between Japanese and the way you guys think and the way that we as Americans think? And one of my Japanese friends said to me, well, Americans are very opinionated.
Really?
And, you know, and the Japanese, their tendency is to not give their opinion. You know, and I think the reason is because there's a humility there, in that they recognize that there's no way you can possibly know everything, you know, and whereas like the Western world, our philosophers have the attitude of trying to find the meaning of life. You know, their philosophers more fatalistic in saying that we can't find the meaning of life, so we're not going to bother. And I think that is part of it, but it really taught me to kind of take a step back and realize that, you know, it's important to be humble.
Yes, so much.
I went to, you know, Hawaii. In Hawaii, you know, it's got its problems too, just like everywhere else, you know. but there was one thing that I noticed there that was really impressive to me is their love of family. Yeah. The importance of, you know, they call it ohana, and it extends beyond just your immediate family. And so there was that was a time where I really got to grow, I think, as a father. You know, I grew up not really knowing how to be a good father, and so I was always busy working. But when I was there, I started surfing with my sons, started walking with my kids every day. I'd take one of them, we'd go for a walk, and I got to learn about what was going on in their lives. And it was a really great experience. And then the kayaking, everything, it was a very healthy time in my life. Right. Now, not so much. But we went to Marforce Cyber. I got picked up for this role on a cyber protection team. And the idea there was that I would be going after hackers that were attempting to infiltrate our national critical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And so they sent me to their cyber course school at FANX, and I ended up going through their training. It was some of the best training I've ever had in my life. And it was really, really intense. I mean, it was like every single day.
Chickens are coming home to roost.
Yes. Yeah, that's Rudy over there. One of the things that happened there was our team was part of the national mission. So we got detached, and we basically were attached to NSA. So I went through and got read on to all of these programs that I had no idea at the time just how relevant they would be now. But things like FISA, things like 702, intelligence authorities, all of that. And I mean, I had my intelligence, you know, that was the first time I ever was part of the intelligence community. And I had my badge that allowed me to, you know, get into places like, you know, the Pentagon and, you know, walk in. And it was really, it was an interesting time. It was the first time I ever had to do polygraph. And
what years roughly?
This would have been 2015, I think, you know, somewhere around there. We ended up, I wasn't there for very long. I was only there for, you know, a little over a year. And that was due to as soon as I got my training and I, you know, put that up on my resume, and immediately I got called, like the day after I graduated from, you know, the Cyber Corps unit, and a company called me and they wanted me to come, you know, interview for twice the amount of money that I was making. So I mean, it was kind of hard to turn down. Yeah. I mean, I loved working there. Probably it was one of the most exciting jobs I ever had. And but you know, when you got a family, you know, you got to consider income. So I ended up going down interviewing with the FBI, and it was one of the most exciting, you know, times of my life, in the sense that I always had this great respect and admiration for the FBI. I saw them as like the premier law enforcement unit. You know, I was not somebody that had a college degree, and so
that's shocking.
Yeah, you know,
you seem so intelligent and educated.
Well, I've educated myself, and I do a lot of reading, and I'm reading. I'm always reading like 3 or 4 books. But
you don't do that in college anymore.
No. But
that's why he's so smart. He didn't go to college.
But I did go to college for a little bit. But I ended up after 2 years of college and $18,000 in debt. I had one child, one on the way, and I was like, how am I going to do this? I can't. You know, I was working and so this is going back in time a little bit. But I was working in the library as part-time as a tutor. And then I was also working a full-time job, you know, doing car sales.
Wow.
So, and struggling to pay, you know, make ends meet to take care of my family. And so I realized I better do something. And I was watching television, and they had this ad come on about the Army Loan Repayment Program. And so I said, you know what?
Sounds good.
Screw this. I'm going into the Army, you know. And and so that's how I ended up going to the Army. And they paid off my student loans. Of course, I didn't know when I signed up they weren't going to pay off the interest. So that interest accrued over time that I was in the Army, and I still ended up with $18,000 of you know, debt when I got out. But you know, it's just one of those things you learn through the school of hard knocks. Right. But I was grateful, you know, for my time in the Army. The biggest thing that it taught me was discipline. Right. I mean, I was a very undisciplined person, I think, prior to the military, and it toughened me up. You know, I was a very sensitive, you know, young man, and especially as a teenager and as a kid, you know, I just didn't, you know, I didn't have that thickness of skin. And when I went into the military, man, you get hit with all kinds of stuff, and you eventually, you know, you come out of it stronger.
That's good.
And so now fast forward to, to my time going to the FBI. When I interviewed with them, they had I think something like 17 guys they had just been going through, and they couldn't get them to they didn't like anybody. And when I interviewed, because I had that training and the unit that I was hired in under the Information Assurance Division, they had another unit that did penetration testing as well. And so I had some skills that could fit both things. And I think that was one of the reasons they really liked me. But I also had a lot of experience in setting up tenable systems. And it was their vulnerability management system. And they were getting ready to deploy it all the way across, the FBI's, all of their field offices and everything. And I had done that for Pearl Harbor Navy Shipyard and helped to, set that up across Misawa and a couple of other places and, remotely in Japan. And so I had some experience in that enterprise, wide area network deployment. So things went really well in the interview, and I got offered the job, and I started working there. And at first it was really slow. This was something that was being pushed down, to
so
the.
Again, what time roughly?
This would have been 2000, late 2016.
So after Trump won?
No.
In the heat of the campaign?
It was probably right in the heat of the campaign, because it was 2018, right?
16.
Sorry, 2016. So no, it had to have been before, dang. All right, so I got the times wrong on this, because I got there before he won, so it was before the election.
Okay.
And but I was working in there, and one day I came in. So let me think about this. I went to Japan 2012, 13, 14, 15. So I came over 2015. Then I worked at NSA 15 to 16.
Let
so
me
it's been
just,
2000.
Let me just add some context
Sure.
that you may or may not be aware of, and this is all publicly available information. So, which is the only thing we deal with.
Sure.
To set your mind at ease. We have done a lot of work on the investigation by the Inspector General of the the intelligence community that began with a referral to the FBI on July 6th, 2015.
Okay.
So the Inspector General of the IC was all over Hillary Clinton and all over the whole process of her having.
Now, when you say the IC, are you talking about Michael Atkinson? Or are you talking about a different one?
The guy before that.
Okay, good. Because I was going to say it had to have been somebody other than
Chuck McCulloch.
Because Atkinson was dirty.
Yeah, Chuck McCulloch.
Okay.
So he was.
That makes sense.
So he was the guy who recommended to the FBI on July 6, 2015, that Hillary Clinton's whole unvetted devices and private server system be investigated.
Right.
And there's a lot. I think it's what now, Jason? 50 plus part report online
like
you can look at in the FBI vault. Hillary R. Clinton. So they begin that right when you're where you were.
Right. So I probably got there then early 2016 because it was before the election.
Right.
But not too much before it.
Right. But so why I'm bringing it up is, in theory, the FBI was investigating Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, and they were.
And in theory, by January of 2016, according to the Horowitz report, they were investigating the Clinton Foundation.
Yes,
in
they
theory,
were.
But they didn't seem to be able to find any of the obvious stuff. That
Well, they
found.
found it.
They
found it. So the documents that I walked out of and so let me get to how I ended up going and looking for these things, because I mean I've had a clearance, top secret clearance, all the way back since 1997.
Wow.
So not something that I wanted to, get in. I've always stayed away from looking at things that I had no business looking at. Since having a clearance, I've always worked in jobs where, basically I'm only looking at stuff that, really relates to my job. And I had never deviated from that, going to look for things that were outside of the scope of my need to know. That all changed on one day when I came into the office, and my supervisor, my government supervisor, was, having a conversation with my other colleague, and it was unusual because I'd been there for about a year and I hadn't seen any kind of, rumors or anything like that. Everything was very compartmentalized at the FBI. And when I came in, and they were kind of whispering over the corner, I walked over and I was like, "Hey, what's going on?" And that's when my supervisor told me that somebody had discovered that, in the FBI, that there were transcripts from a conversation that had occurred over a chat system, and that this system is it's like Skype, you know, like for business, but the FBI uses it and internally.
Is that teleport?
No, no. It literally is like it's Skype. It's called Link, but they have it built in for their, you know, FBI net on the high side, on the classified side, and so they're communicating, you know, in conference calls. But FBI has one thing that's really, really good, and that is their record management is bar none some of the best in the world, and that's because of things that have happened that they've had to, you know, improve on it. And so it transcribes these conversations that are happening in these calls, and then it dumps them somewhere.
Wow. And
so apparently it got dumped, but it didn't get compartmentalized right away, and somebody saw the conversation that was going on with people on the 7th floor. And this discussion was about Hillary Clinton and about what they were going to do with some major findings or major things that they had found. And words like, this is what was related to me, words like treason, you know, were being talked about. The statement was made that this is big enough it could take down the government, you know, things like that. Their determination was they were going to cover up everything.
So this is making my head spin, which is fantastic, but I don't know if you know Larry Johnson, but he's somebody we've come to know, and he has a piece out on the 21st of April reminding folks of the work that I had done, exposing, and Jason had done, exposing a senior State Department whistleblower who sent a letter to Comey around January 10th, 2016, so just around the time that, you know, you're talking about there, saying, I have evidence of treason, not just by Hillary Clinton, also by, I believe, Barack Obama, and I want to go into a skiff with you, and I want to give you this information, and I want you to tell me that you received my letter. You didn't do that, so January 27th, this guy comes in, and we have a copy of the letter. It's in the public domain. We have a copy of how the FBI reacted at the Washington field office, and in short, they didn't react. This guy, Giacalone, who was leading the investigation, he promptly resigned in late January 2016. So.
Well, there's something else too that happened. I don't think I've ever talked about this in any interview before because I didn't know how relevant it was, but when I first got there was a big scandal about a missing laptop.
Right.
Okay, I'm talking about in the department I worked at.
Right.
So the department I worked at, my supervisor, he was in charge of all the equipment. He had to sign off on it, and he had been asked by one of the other, you know, field agencies or whatever to provide a laptop that had the capabilities of copying a hard drive, you know, burning a forensic copy, and it had all the like tools for pen testing and everything else. And so this laptop was issued, and then it just disappeared and never returned. And you know, and I know it was used in some investigation up in New York. That's all I know. But remember, there was the issue of the Huma Abedin laptop, right?
Exactly.
It was right around that same time, and I suspected it might have been that, but it was
so someone cloned the Huma Abedin laptop onto this laptop? Is that what you said?
So that's what the laptop had the capability of doing, and pen testing and doing what they call a forensic capture. And so,
why do you suspect somebody would have done that? What?
Well, so when you do a forensic capture, there's very strict procedures that you have to use in order to ensure that the integrity of the data. Every time you copy a file, it actually changes the hash file. It changes the checksum. It changes the date and time, you know, of the file being, you know, affected. So there's tools that are used to where you can do what's called a forensic copy, but you have to first do a forensic wipe of the drive, and then you basically move the file using a certain tool set that does not modify, you know, those files, and you hash it before and you hash it afterwards to make sure that they match, and then it's forensically sound and it can be used in a court of law.
Digital clone.
Right. Digital clone, exactly. It's the difference between a clone versus a copy.
We do this in Hollywood as well.
Yeah.
Camera data is digitally cloned in the same exact method that you're talking about.
So this was what that laptop had that capability of doing, and it was removed. You know, it was issued out, and it never came back. And my boss was getting heat because they had an inventory, and he was trying to figure out where this laptop was going. You know, where it went and when he was going to get it back. And you know, he was being told from some other department that, you know, he wasn't getting it back, but yet they didn't sign, you know, a release to keep it. It was just checked out to borrow. So it was a nightmare. And so the bad thing is, in the FBI, they take that kind of thing very seriously. Yeah. And he was being held responsible for it. I remember him being really pissed off about it. But that was kind of interesting because it was right around that same time. And then when he told me about this other issue, you know, I remember thinking, no way. You know, you got to. I mean, I knew there was stuff going on. I knew this at this time. The main thing that was going on was the Hillary email server, you know, was being investigated, and I knew, you know, and so I was kind of like, the thought of a cover-up, you know, I had to look. I couldn't just ignore that. But when I went and looked, I saw I never did find those transcripts because by the time I got in there, it was probably already moved. But what I did find was I found a whole lot of Treasury suspicious activity reports that had been, you know, sent over by FinCEN.
Let me stop you there just
Sure.
for the audience. How much trouble might you get in with one suspicious activity report? What does that mean exactly when something like that gets issued?
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean anything at first. A suspicious activity report is just that, it's suspicion. But these were different. These were ones that had already been analyzed by intelligence analysts within the FBI. And they had analyst notes down below. They had a case number, so they were part of an investigation. They were considered evidence. They had field offices that they were connected to. And one of the things that was surprising to me was the ones that I saw all said high credibility of, you know, of criminal activity.
Wow.
And so the criminal codes that were assigned to these different FinCEN notices were, one was money laundering. That was the majority of them were related to money laundering. You had public corruption, you had securities and exchange fraud, and you had terrorism financing.
Wow.
And all of these things were there, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, there's no way Hillary Clinton doesn't get indicted. I mean, this was like, it had the bank accounts and the routing for how money went from this account to this account to this shell corporation to this shell account to this charity to that charity, and it named all the names, all the people, everybody involved, all of that. So I mean, they were able to see everything.
And again, the timing, if you could try to remember a little bit more specifically, was it March 2016? Was it June? Was it September?
It had. So I know it was before the election.
Right.
I know it was probably March. Probably sounds about right, somewhere around there. And at first, when I saw this, these had field offices that these were assigned to, and they also had it was field offices that were assigned, and then there were case numbers assigned. So my thought was, well, no, this isn't being covered up. They're investigating it, you know,
right.
And investigations take time, and so, you know, let them do their job and they'll finish and everything. Then you'll remember Comey came out and he made that statement in front of
July.
Yeah.
Just if I apologize for keep jumping in, but first what happened was that Bill Clinton showed up in Phoenix on the tarmac with Loretta Lynch on June 27th.
That's right.
It was. And, you know, they tried to explain they were talking about grandchildren. And I'm not an intelligence professional or, you know, even a journalist, but I know what Phoenix is like in June.
I think everybody knew that was bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just all the way it is.
Terminology.
Yes, that's a technical term. Yeah, and I remember, you know, even some talk in the office, you know, that, you know, my division head, I remember, you know, him and I having a conversation about that, and none of us believed that, you know, that was legit.
And what was interesting to me is that this FBI vault, you probably have been through it, the FBI vault, and I don't know how they decide what goes into the vault and what doesn't go into the vault, but the FBI vault on the tarmac meeting is all about the FBI saying, who is this prick bastard, excuse my language, in journalism,
who died
who later died, who, you know, released this story. How did this get out? Not, you know, why is President Clinton meeting with, you know, former President Clinton meeting with Loretta Lynch? It was shocking to me, the tone.
So Comey came out and he did this, you know, press conference in front of, you know, J. Edgar Hoover building. And I'll never forget because I was standing up there, you know, in the office. Now I didn't work in the J. Edgar Hoover building. I worked down in a non-disclosed building where the Information Assurance Division was, but it was in Washington, D.C. And I remember watching, the news, because they had news on all the time in there. Of course, it was always, MSNBC or CNN, right?
That's not news.
but I remember watching and seeing Comey get out there. And at first, I'm thinking, oh man, they're about ready to lay out an indictment, because the first thing Comey does is he lays out essentially everything about all the crimes that had been committed, right? And the one thing that stuck out to me that was like just shocking was that they had found 7 email chains on her email server that had SAPs. And special access programs, and a lot of people don't know what those are, or even why that's such a big deal. But these are programs that are above top secret. They're top secret, but they're compartmentalized too, meaning you can't, even if you had a top secret, you can't access them. You have to be read on to the program to even be able to see them, and then they're kept in a compartmentalized area of a SCIF.
Wow.
And they're not on a computer that is connected to the internet or anything like that. There's no possible way to spill. Sometimes secret stuff gets spilled, and it happens. And I've seen a lot of that. And it's usually because somebody, copied something or printed something, or it was sent down through a system and they didn't have the proper markings on it. But something that is a SAP, it's in an envelope, or a folder that's folded over the top. It never leaves the SCIF.
How would she get that stuff?
Well, she was the Secretary of State.
Wow.
So, but my question was, who brought it out, who put it on her server, and then, because that was clearly illegal, and one might even argue it was a violation of the Espionage Act. And I mean, that's what I was always warned about. You take anything out of here, you're going to get charged with espionage and mishandling classified information, and that would be the worst. That would be the least of your problems.
That stays at the top of mind. Doesn't
it? It does. And so when I heard him talking about this, I'm thinking, oh man, she's going down. And then he said, and he also mentioned too that they had confirmed that foreign countries had accessed her server and had likely compromised it. So my first thought was she running a Dropbox? Was that what was going on here, with her email server? Was this like, oh, let's put some files here, and then certain people that, maybe, pay to play or whatever will let them supposedly hack in and get these documents? I mean, I can only speculate, but it was extremely troubling to see that being told to us. And then the next thing out of Comey's mouth is, no reasonable prosecutor would bring a charge against her. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Right.
And so when that happened, I knew that everything I had been told about a cover-up was true, that they were going to cover this up. And so then began the turmoil of trying to figure out, number one, how could I blow the whistle? Because Comey, Rod Rosenstein even, because remember, he was the attorney he was the U.S. attorney that went after 10X and all of the Russian Rosatom kickback scheme, but nothing had ever happened, right? There was no charges ever there. Right. You had McCabe, you had, and then, so everybody in my chain of command is implicated in this.
Wow.
Robert Mueller was the FBI director at the time, that things went down with Uranium One. And then the other thing too was the intelligence community IG at the time was Michael Atkinson. Michael Atkinson was the head of the public corruption unit. So how could there was no way for me to even bring this stuff out through the normal chain of command. So, I prayed long and hard about it. And honestly, I didn't even want to do this because I knew the moment I did, the likelihood was nothing would happen except that I would get, have my career ruined and possibly put in jail or, set up or killed because I'm dealing with Russian intelligence agents and their information. Not to mention, Hillary Clinton.
And the FBI.
Yeah, and the FBI. And I mean, honestly, it was a very scary scenario. And I remember coming home and laying in bed next to my wife, and I'm looking up at the ceiling, and she knew something was up. She's like, what's going on? I said, I think I'm going to have to blow the whistle on the FBI. And she goes, why you? Why does it have to be you? And I told her, because who else is going to be? I knew this stuff. I had access to it. I saw it. Nobody else is going to do this. I mean, obviously other people had seen it and nobody else had blown the whistle. So, I believe that God probably put me in that position for a reason. And I didn't want someday to be standing before him to say, hey, you remember that time I sent you to the FBI and you did nothing about what I revealed to you?
What did your wife say to that?
Oh, eventually she said, yeah, well, if you feel God, is leading you to do this, and you have to do it. And she said, I'll support you. And
good wife.
But I'll tell you, there were many, many nights that we paid dearly for that, and just had, the stress on us like I don't think I've ever had in my life since. But we ended up, I had to figure out a way to get this information, first of all, out of the FBI, and I couldn't break any laws doing it. So I had to make sure that I did everything by the book, because I knew they would come after me. I knew it. Mm-hmm. It would eventually come out. Like soon as this information ended up in the hands of one of the committees, the Democrats, on the committee would leak this information back to the FBI,
right.
And then once they had a list of the documents that were, taken, then they could go back and look through history and figure out who took them out. Because I was not about to delete any of the records of me removing these documents, because that would be obstruction of justice. So I knew I needed to do things by the book, and so the first thing I did was I went and I looked at the law, and I looked to see who can take classified documents. And there was one group of people that I found that were capable of taking classified documents from anyone, and those were senior staff members to the two intelligence committees, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And I remember I made a call to the HPSI, and I immediately hung up because I got their voicemail, and I thought to myself,
Whoa.
They're probably listening,
right,
and monitoring any calls being made to the HPSI.
Caller ID.
Because remember, I had worked at NSA, and I knew the capabilities that we had for surveillance.
Yeah.
And my thinking is, these people are criminal, they're crooked. What better place to look for and monitor for whistleblowers than the Intelligence Committee's phone line?
Yeah.
I figured they're probably tapped and probably don't even realize
Don't
it. So
they control those intelligence oversight committees? That's been alleged.
it is true in the sense that they have. There was a document that was released by Senator Grassley, and it was put up on the Senate Judiciary website. And it said, it basically was a D-class document showing that the CIA was spying on the intelligence committees to find whistleblowers. So there's, so this kind of stuff. So I knew, so the next thing that I had to do was figure out, okay, how do I get to them without going through proper channels, right? And so I needed a surrogate. And there was a guy who had a YouTube channel called The Still Report.
Bill Still. Sure, yeah.
So I reached out, Bill Still. I knew he was a Christian. He always had a Bible verse at the end of his show. But I also know that he had Bill Binney, who was a NSA whistleblower, on his show. And so I knew he probably had some connections maybe in Washington. And so I reached out to him initially with a Proton email account saying, hey, I have something I need to talk to you about, but I'm not gonna talk to you on regular email. You have to get a Proton Mail account and then contact me on this Proton Mail account. And the reason I knew to do that, again, I was with NSA, and the fact is that Proton Mail's email servers all reside in Geneva, Switzerland, which is outside the EU and outside of the US's jurisdiction. And Proton Mail was created by the scientists at CERN who didn't want the NSA and CIA spying on them. So I figured, if long as we had this conversation, both of us are on, that email service would be okay. So he, surprisingly, he reached back out, and he got, within I think a half hour, he reached out to me, and so we started communicating, and and I talked to him about, what was going on, and I shared with him, and I said, look, I need help. I need to find a way to get to Devin Nunes and get this information to him, because he was at the time the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and they were doing all kinds of inquiries into uranium-1 and a whole lot of other stuff. And I had all of this information. At this point, I had copied these copies of this information to my work computer. And that's not, strange or anything, because people are moving files around all the time, and it's still on the high side. And I didn't know how I was going to get the information out of there. I knew I could print it and hand carry it out, but then, there's a record made of you printing it. And but anytime you plugged in a thumb drive, it would set off, it would set off an alert, because the thumb drives are prohibited. But a bit of providence came my way, and they moved me from one desk to another after a teammate that on the pen testing team was walked out. They moved me to his desk, and his desk had a computer that was used for pen testing, and so it did not have all of those security features on it. And so I was able to take a non-serialized thumb drive, plug it in, copy everything onto that thumb drive.
When someone's walked out,
yeah,
that's
fired
bad. And getting in trouble?
That's bad. When you're walked out, it means that typically you've done something, or your clearance has been revoked, or you've been accused of something, and yeah, it's more than just being fired.
Wow.
And I actually saw, I think, 3 people walked out in the time that I was working there. It was a very hostile work environment.
But it could be that these people are looking into whatever bad stuff is, like what you're talking about. Wow.
I mean, when I was working there, we had, I think it was on 2 occasions where some guys, counterintelligence guys came in, or counter-surveillance, and they had these scopes and stuff looking for, bugs and looking for, cameras, hidden cameras, and they told me to step away from my desk, and and they did this to everybody in there. And this is in a skiff, and so they're looking at everybody, all the time. They saw all of us as potential, spies, which is, it's
good
crazy,
work environment.
right? Yeah, it's a little stressful, a little bit stressful. And so when I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I'm going to try to basically carry stuff out of here and not get caught, because I realized if I got caught, like on my way out, they could stop and search me, and had I been searched, how am I going to explain myself?
Right.
Now, I had a courier card, so I was authorized to carry classified information. And I had to, of course, package stuff the right way. But before I did anything, I wanted a sure-proof plan of how I would get it out of there. And so that's when I reached out to Bill, and I asked him if he could get me in touch with the HPSI. And he did. He had somebody that he knew who had, had Nunez's ear. And so he reached out.
And that was Robert David Steele?
No, it wasn't him. No. I don't know. I can't.
Stephen Biss?
Nope, not Stephen Biss. You keep naming names that I might remember, but I don't remember the guy's name. But if somebody said it, I would remember. But it's funny because he came up later in the story too. And so apparently this guy was very connected, because when my lawyer wanted to get in touch with Devin Nunez, he contacted the same guy who Bill Still had contacted. So this was somebody who clearly had a connection, but he was not on the committee. But he had a connection. He was able to get information to him. So the agreement was made for me to meet with a senior staff member to Devin Nunez, and so I ended up going through and packaging everything up. I had my courier card with me. I walked out. And man, I was probably sweating bullets that day. It was October 31st, 2000. This would have been 2017.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I ended up.
What'd you dress as for Halloween?
Well,
Trump.
no, I ended up walking out, and I went down to the botanical gardens, and then Bill Still drove up, picked me up in front of the botanical gardens, and then it was funny because I thought for sure we were gonna I thought we were gonna get busted. I mean, I'm like nervous, and I'm on the phone with him, and he's like, "Oh shoot, I'm getting pulled over by the police," and I'm thinking, "No," Just turned out he made a turn on the wrong street that he shouldn't have been making a left turn from. So we were. Man, both him and I think we're like very stressed out.
The movie is writing itself.
It is, And so finally he comes and gets me, and we drive up and around the corner, and we go up to the executive offices and picked up the senior staff member. Now he gets in the vehicle, and I immediately went to show him my badge because I wanted to make sure he knew I was a legit, whistleblower, not just somebody, pretending. And he immediately said, "I don't want to see your badge." And I was like shocked by that because I thought, well, then how do you know that, I'm legit? And he goes, "Look, I don't want to see your badge because," he says, "it's safer for you that way." Wow. And then he told me something that really blew my mind. He said, meaning the HPSI, They had good reason to believe that they were being surveilled
Right.
by the intelligence community.
Absolutely.
And
That's a week before. Sorry, this is in 2017. So this is
Trump's already been president by this time.
Okay.
And that was the other thing too, is that I felt like even still I was still nervous as heck, because you had some really bad dudes still working in the FBI and in the DOJ, and it was clear that Trump didn't have control over either of those institutions.
Never did.
No. So I ended up meeting with this guy. We drove around the Capitol for about 3 hours. I debriefed him on everything, and I had more than just that stuff. So everybody knows about Uranium-1, but what also I had in there was I had a document that showed that the FBI was paying the Southern Poverty Law Center to get information. They were paying them as an advisor to tell them who, what groups were homegrown extremists.
Which is anybody they decide.
And one of the groups that they had determined was a homegrown extremist was this group that was it was a Christian organization that practiced conversion therapy, which was to help gay people who wanted to go back to being go to being straight. This is a voluntary thing, but they were saying that made them an extremist group. And so, and they had other Christian organizations and even some like mission groups and stuff like that were in there. And I couldn't believe it. Yet they had nothing in there about BLM, nothing in there about Antifa.
Wow.
Nothing in there about, other groups that, were truly extremist and violent,
right.
Separatist groups. So it was kind of shocking to me, and I thought, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence needed to know that. There was another document I had that showed that the FBI had done an assessment on election integrity or election security as it related to foreign hacking. And their assessment was that the likelihood of foreign hacking was very low, like almost impossible, because of the way that the election systems were distributed. And that but yet they had a big old thing about Russian influence, particularly over, with bots and with social media. And they had nothing in there, not a single assessment about China. And as somebody who was on a cyber protection team that was assigned to a Chinese advanced persistent threat, I knew darn well that China was the bigger threat in terms of cyber than Russia ever was. I mean, we had, and I don't want to name the exact names, but I'll just say we had a lot more teams dedicated to Chinese APTs than we did Russia.
I mean, doesn't that make sense just on its face? There's more people in China, all the technology is manufactured in China, anything backdoored is coming out of China.
Yeah. So I was concerned that two things. One, I had just seen a briefing that was given. So as I'm talking to this guy, I'm basically, sharing with him what the contents are of the thumb drive. And he says to me, he says, look, we've been getting stonewalled by the FBI. We've requested oversight into several documents related to Uranium-1, and we really need, evidence. They wanted to know what the FBI knew about the Russians trying to infiltrate our uranium supply chain at the time that they were allowing the CFIUS committee, was making the decision to sell Uranium-1 or allow the sale of Uranium-1 to Russian energy company Rosatom.
And wasn't Mueller directly involved? He knew everything.
Mueller was directly involved. And so I went, he asked me if I would go back in and get this information and bring it out. I was reluctant to do it because I only had a week left at the FBI, and I was really stressing out.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to get the hell out of there. At that point, I was worried about, growing eyes in the back of my head, and, and also too, when you do something like that, you're going to be nervous, you're going to display nervousness, and I figure, somebody's going to get suspicious of something. So I wanted to get out of there. So I had a job lined up, and that was one of the, I guess you could say, one of the fleeces that I laid out before God was I said, God, if I'm going to do this, I need you to provide me another job like yesterday. And 2 days later, I got offered a job without even me putting my resume out.
That's amazing.
And somebody reached out to me offering me a job to work for the VA, and it was 100% work from home. And it was a great opportunity. It was about a $40,000 pay cut, But with not having to drive down there and not having to pay for parking and all this other stuff, it kind of made sense, and I was able to tighten my budget a little bit and do it. But I had, he asked me to go back in, and then I said, well, how will I communicate with you, And he said, load this app, Wicker ME, and then he gave me his code name, and we tested it and made sure that everything connected.
This was the same app that Anthony Weiner got nailed for using, Wicker.
Yeah, I don't remember what he was using, but it was a public tool that was a commercial app for encrypted chat. So I ended up going in, and it took me some nerve, to do this. I mean, honestly, I had like a week to think about how I was going to do this, and I waited till the last day. And I went and I searched for stuff, and I found stuff, but like to actually walk out with it, I wanted to walk out with it and never have to look back. So I ended up going to searching for intelligence information, and this was even scarier because now you're getting into stuff that has people's names on it that are enemies of the state. If somebody finds out that I had surveillance footage on Russian intelligence agents, the stuff that gets you killed. And so I was very concerned about taking that stuff out, but I had a lot of documents that showed they were dated and time-stamped prior to the CFIUS committee signing off on that. And the thing is Robert Mueller, who at the time was the FBI director, he had a responsibility to the CFIUS committee to notify them of any knowledge that they would have had, of Rosatom being dirty.
Right.
And of course they did know. They knew that Rosatom was was paying kickbacks. And so, to get control over the yellow cake transportation and all of that. So I had that. I also found several documents that were daily presidential briefings. So these would have been documents that Obama would have been briefed on that spoke to these issues. So Obama knew about it, Mueller knew about it, of course Comey knew about it, Rod Rosenstein knew about it, and also the ICIG, Michael Atkinson, knew about it. So I brought those documents out, and I tried contacting my contact, and I didn't get anything.
Oh.
And
well, that had to be immediate.
Oh, immediately my
terror.
heart sunk. I mean, I knew at that point I was so screwed.
Hinged.
I couldn't even bring the stuff back in because I waited till the last day, and so I was really, in a bad way. And I ended up, and I still had my courier card. Now I was supposed to turn in my courier card, but I knew if I walked out and I didn't have my courier card, I would have been in big trouble. And so I just, I fibbed. I told my, my security officer. I said, well, I must have left it at home, so I'll turn it in to my, to my contracting employer. And she said that's fine. So I used that when I walked out, and I had it, but I'm sitting there, I got this thumb drive now, this classified thumb drive, and I was left twisting in the wind, with nowhere to take it.
Just having it is a crime, right?
Well, once you're out, yeah.
Wow.
And the thing is now it's not a crime to remove classified information for the purpose of whistleblowing. So I had some protection in that regards. But the problem is I hadn't gone through the IG. I had gone directly to the HPSI. And so without them to back up my claims that I was, a whistleblower working for them under their authority. Yeah, it's, now Bill Still was my witness on the first handoff, but he wasn't there for the second one. And so now it's like I'm in this quasi problem. So I called Bill, and I was like, Bill, can you contact your contact and find out what happened, because they're not returning my call? And he at that time said, look, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not getting return calls from our contact.
Boy.
And so he said, I don't trust the situation. Oh. And so I asked him, I said, well, can you help me find a lawyer? Because I'm going to have to find a lawyer that can represent me as a whistleblowing attorney. And so he ended up reaching out, finding an attorney. Joseph Schmitz was a former DOD IG who was on the Trump transition team. And but he said he couldn't take my case because he had a conflict of interest, so he recommended his law partner, a guy by the name of Michael. And Michael, I ended up meeting, I met with him, but I told him I would only meet him somewhere very public, but yet where we could have a private conversation. I mean, at this point I thought, you know, I'm going to end up dead or in jail, you know, or both, you know, soon. And I had brought the thumb drive home and put it in my safe, you know, but I couldn't destroy it. That would have been destroying evidence. I knew I still needed to get it to these people. And at this point, I had no reason to believe that, you know, anything done to me was done on purpose. I didn't know what to think. I thought maybe they thought I was a plant, you know, by the FBI trying to trick them, because there had been some news stories about, I think it was Devin Nunes and Trey Gowdy, where the FBI tried to set them up by asking them to come to a SCIF, and then they were going to leak the information. And so they said they went to the SCIF, but then they didn't. And so then sure enough, the information got leaked, and so they were like, we see what's going on here. And of course they, you know, FBI tried to say, well, you know, you must have leaked this information. And they were able to say, well, we never went to the SCIF, check your logs.
Wow.
So
do you, who leaked that? Do you have any, is that James Baker, or do we know who?
Somebody inside the FBI, you know, and they were trying to set up, you know, the House intelligence
And
members.
on that specific leak, do you know where it came, who published it? Where did it come out through? We don't know.
I don't remember. It came out probably Washington Post or
That's what I
something.
was going to say, probably
You know, it was always Washington Post or New York Times that seemed to be doing the bidding for the FBI.
Right.
And so they, so Michael, I met with him at his church. He was a devout Catholic, and he invited me to his church, St. Michael's. And I remember when I met with him, you know, I was very nervous, but you know, we talked, and then we went in the church and we prayed, and then, you know, at the end of the conversation, he told me, he said, look, he says, are you independently wealthy? And I said, no.
Oh, that's the bad
That's a
No.
bad
from a
question.
lawyer.
Right. And he goes, well, do you have any rich relatives? And I said,
boy.
no. And he goes, because I'm very expensive.
Oh.
And he was about $750 an hour.
Wow.
And I told him, I said, you can't do this pro bono. And he laughed. And he says, my law partner would throw me out of the office. He said, this is way too much liability. You're talking the FBI, Hillary Clinton, and Russian intelligence. I can't do that. So, you know, so he suggested, you know, maybe we could find, you know, a few benefactors that might be willing to start a legal fund for me.
Yeah.
And he, so that night I went home, and I felt defeated. I felt like, you know, my life's over. I got with my wife. You know, we prayed and cried and prayed some more, and, you know, begged God to get me out of this jam. And the next was maybe 2 days later, Michael calls me and he says, well, I got some interesting news, good news. So I went down and I talked to a woman down in Nashville that I know who, you know, she has means, and she's, you know, she wanted to help me out, and I'd done some work for her before, and he said, so, you know, I went and I talked to her about your situation, and I was hoping that she would maybe, you know, donate like $10,000 to kind of get you started on a legal fund. And he says, she asked me how much it was going to cost, and I told her it was going to be about $200,000. And he said, and she pulled out her checkbook and wrote a check for $200,000.
Wow. That's a good benefactor.
Yeah. My legal fees ended up coming to, and this was with several lawyers, because I had Michael, and then I had a defense attorney, and then
500.
co-counsel. It came to $198,000.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah. That was, I really believe, God's hand in that.
Oh, yeah.
And then the second miracle that happened a couple of days later, when Michael called me and asked me to get together with him. He was not a defense attorney, and he wanted to get some defense counsel. And so we went to go meet with Joe DeGeneva and Victoria Tausing at their house, because
That's great.
Victoria Tausing was representing the other Uranium One whistleblower, the guy who was an FBI informant, and who had been left with, you know, these classified hard drives, and the FBI just cut him loose with no help or support or anything. So, so I got together with Michael, and we met, you know, at a grocery store, and left my car in the parking lot and got in his car, and I was so stressed out and so nervous at this point, and I asked Michael if we could pray, and he said yes. Now, going back 10 years prior to that, my wife and I had been at a church in Southern California that we were doing this prayer and fasting and learning to hear God, and so, you know, we were supposed to pray. and fast, and then we were supposed to just be quiet and listen for that still small voice and then write down what we hear. And so I only heard one thing, and it was go to Sakaris. And I didn't know where that was, so I got on MapQuest, and I'm looking all over the United States. I cannot find a single place called Sakaris. Now my wife, she was a Spanish major, and because she told me that she remembered the story, but she had told me at the time, well, maybe you heard wrong. Maybe it's Socorro, which means help. And I looked, there was a Socorro, New Mexico, but I was like, no, I know what I heard. It was Sakaris. So, we just kind of forgot about it. I put it on a shelf, and moved on with life. And so now fast forward back to, I'm sitting in the car with Michael, and he prays with me. And at the end of that prayer, all of a sudden I remember that memory, and I realize his name is Sakaris, Michael Sakaris.
Wow. And
so it was in my opinion, it was a miracle. But it showed me that I was right where God wanted me to be. I had nothing to fear. There was nothing for me to be afraid about. And so at that point, something changed in me, and I was not afraid anymore. That's not to say I didn't have scary moments. I mean, clearly, eventually when I was raided, that was scary. But it got rid of that anxiety that I was living under every single day, after blowing the whistle. So Michael eventually made contact with, in that meeting with Joe DeGeneva, we made the decision it would be best to go through and file a official Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act, because the WPA, the Whistleblower Protection Act, only applied to federal employees, and I was a contractor. So the ICWPA applied to contractors and government employees, but typically you would take that kind of a complaint to the ICIG, but we couldn't take it to him. And the ICWPA did not protect you against reprisal. So it protected you against, prosecution, but it didn't protect you against reprisal.
That seems worse.
Right. Well, so I ended up, we made the decision that, to contact IG Horowitz. At that point, Horowitz had come out with a report that had spoken to McCabe's lack of candor. And so it showed that he at least was willing to call things out. Because we didn't know whether we could trust him, but it turned out he was a very trustworthy man. In fact, I have nothing but admiration for him, because he went to great lengths to make sure our information, or my information that I had taken out, got to those committees. So so Michael started communicating with them, and first thing is he agreed to allow me to use a code name, and not give away my identity. And Michael chose the code name MC Poda. Now,
how did you get that?
I know that was my first response.
MC Hammer?
No. So I thought MC Poda, when he showed me it, I'm like, what a lame name. You couldn't pick something more exciting, come on, man, this is like a once in a lifetime thing. There's going to be a book written about this. And he goes, oh, no. He says, MC Poda is really cool. Now, Michael, a little backstory on him. He was a Cuban immigrant. He saw his father put into a work camp, and
Wow.
As a dissident, and they fled to America when he was a young boy. And so he has a disdain for communism, like absolutely hates it.
Yeah.
And so Michael tells me, he goes, no, MC Poda's cool, you'll like it. And I go, what does it mean? He goes, making communists pay out the ass. And I was like, all right, I love that name. I'll take that name. So I was, that was the code name I was given, MC Poda. And it's on the documents that, that went forward to the IG.
Great.
But we made a decision to do a exchange of prisoners, to hand over the documents at St. John's Church across from the White House. And
is that the church?
That
BLM
Trump went
church?
to
yes,
with
the one that got burned down, or they lit a fire on. Yeah, so we went down. Now I can't remember the exact date, but I remember it was right after. I want to say it was either right around or on Trump's birthday.
So June of 18 or 19?
This would have been 18.
June of 18.
Yeah,
okay.
June 18. So yeah, I think it was Trump's birthday that day, and I think there was also a report that Horowitz was testifying that day, because he couldn't meet with me himself, so he sent his senior staff member, guy named Sean Meeham, I think. So we ended up going there. I wore a hoodie and sunglasses. I shaved off all of my facial hair to make my face look different because I figured I'd grow it back.
You actually own a hoodie?
Yeah. No, I listen.
MC Poda
Listen, I was like, I'm like, these guys are going to try to, capture either a picture of me or voice recognition or something. I don't trust anybody. And so I told Michael, I said, I want a situation where, I can hand off the stuff with that. And Michael couldn't hand it to him because he didn't have a clearance. So Michael never saw the documents that I had. He could not look at them, and he didn't have a clearance, so he could actually not, do the handoff. And but they wanted me, we asked them, said, do you want the thumb drive? They said no. Print out the documents and then double wrap them with, secret no foreign written on the inside envelope and, just a plain envelope on the outside. I mean, it was like stacked like this thick.
Why not take the drive?
Well, this is what we were told, is that I was authorized to maintain the drive because if the committees did nothing, then I could take it to the judiciary or a different committee. So this is what makes it so despicable that the FBI came, raided me to take the drive, because nothing ended up coming of it, and I could have taken that information to one of the other committees like the judiciary. I think it's possible that Senator Grassley might have done something about it.
Sure.
He was very much, a protector of whistleblowers and very much about exposing corruption.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the information, after they took it. But so I ended up printing out, I think it was like 458 pages or some, I don't know if that was the exact number, but it was somewhere around there. And, it was like a book. So we go down there, we met across the street at the hotel, and then we walked across the street, walked in. And they had no idea where we were going to meet. They were just told, we will call you with the time, and place of where to meet, and on this day. And so we went in there. I sat in the front pew, and Michael told me when they come up, he says he'll escort them in, tap me on the shoulder, and I'm to take the package and hand it over my left shoulder so that he never sees my face and not say a word. So that's exactly what happened. He called him. Sean met with Michael out front of the church. He walks him in, taps me on the shoulder. I handed them the package, and then he escorted him out. And then Michael came back in. We knelt and prayed, and then we got up and walked out. And that was it for for a while. We had a waiting period of about 7 days that they were supposed to review, and then 21 days they had to give us authorization to take it to him. And what ended up happening was it ended up dragging out for longer than that, because the information went up to the AG, which was
Sessions or Barr?
Jeff Sessions, and Jeff Sessions refused to even look at it,
of course,
or give it a credibility rating, which was a violation of the law. He was supposed to.
Wow.
So it came back down, and so it got held up for a while. Now, I knew at this point, when I filed my complaint, I did not name Rod Rosenstein because he was in that chain of command, and so I didn't want that information. I knew it would get forgotten about or
buried.
It would disappear, and so I left him out of it. So I just named Robert Mueller, Jim Comey, and the ICIG, Michael Atkinson. But originally, the complaint would have had Rosenstein in there as well. So I ended up, it ended up basically sitting in his office and not going nowhere. And then we contacted the IG saying, hey, what the heck, 7 days we're supposed to hear back from you guys. And he apologized, and he asked us if we would give like a couple extra days, and so we agreed. And so, and then he came back to us, after about 9 days and said, well, he said, this has never happened before, but I have an AG that is refusing to give it a credibility rating.
Wow. Never happened before.
Never happened before.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and so he said, but I can see that this information is a national security concern, of urgent concern. He said, so would you be okay if I gave it a credibility rating? We're like, yes.
Sure.
So, he has access to the FBI net. All of these documents are serialized. They can go look and see.
Yeah.
And so he looked at it, gave it a credibility rating, and then gave us authorization to take it to the committees.
Wow.
So we contacted the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence first, and they asked if I would be willing to testify, to which I, immediately said, not no, but hell no. I mean, this information was black and white. What do you need me to testify for, so that you can leak my name and then get me killed?
Right.
I don't think so. And so I refused to testify, and I refused to give them my name. They wanted my name.
They always want the name, don't they?
Yeah, they wanted my name, and they were like, no. So then they said, well, then we're not going to take the information from you.
What?
Yeah, so we went back to Horowitz and we said, hey, they're not willing to take the information from us. What do we do? And he said, well, ask them if I give them the information, if they'll take it from me in my office. And so we went back and asked. They said yes.
Oh.
So Horowitz's senior staff member delivered it by hand to both the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And in the House, it was a guy by the name of Cordon Hull who received the package and reviewed it and confirmed that it was of an urgent concern, national security, and then he promptly gave it to, the HPSC. So he was like their liaison. I found out months later the Senate never even received it. They got, like, whoever their liaison was, shoved it in a drawer and forgot about it.
So sorry, this is before the November 2018 midterm election.
Oh, yeah.
So had your
Before the
information got out in the public domain and been taken seriously, been reviewed by the House and the Senate.
Yeah. So November 18 was when I was getting raided.
Right. Well, so this explains why maybe you were getting raided.
Right. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. The Senate never got it. I think later it was retrieved by Lindsey Graham, because, and I'll get to that story in a minute. But
sounds like captured.
Yeah. So I ended up going home, and I just kind of forgot about it. And I still had this thumb drive, but I took it and I buried it in my backyard.
Wow.
I mean, I took a baby food jar, put it in a Ziploc bag, shoved it in there, buried it. I figure, I don't want anybody, finding this. And so, while I was waiting around, to see what was going to happen, and I knew something was up because my phone, I started having weird situations going on with my phone. Clicks, weird.
You mean while you're on calls, hearing things?
Yeah, feedback, weird clicks, weird things like that. And I knew I was under surveillance. And Michael, God bless him, is a lawyer, and so he thinks that people are going to follow the law when they work for the Justice Department. And so he calls me up and he says, he always started his conversation with us with, this is attorney-client privileged conversation. No one's authorized to listen to this conversation, and that's how he would start the conversation. Well, they didn't care about that. Right. They're listening. And so, they just can't use it in court, but they certainly used it to figure out when to raid my home.
Right.
So he calls and goes, hey, we got this problem with the thumb drive that you still have. He goes, we need to get that somewhere safe and out of your house. And I'm like, oh, I'm thinking to myself, shoot, they're probably listening to this conversation. But he says, we need to get this out of your house and down some, get it somewhere safe. And so I told him, okay. And literally like 2 days later, the feds show up, at my house.
What time roughly, and how many of them? And
so I got the thumb drive, mind you, unburied it. Yeah, had they raided my house when it was buried, they would never have found it, because I'd have just shut my mouth and not said anything, and they be on a Easter egg hunt,
right, and not dig up the backyard.
But he because he told me to take it out, I took it out, and that's when they knew that was their opportunity. So I can't remember exactly what time it was. It must probably like early afternoon. It was not, or maybe it was, no, I think it was morning, because I think it was about 9 o'clock in the morning, because I was there for like 6 hours while they were interrogating me and searching my home.
This is November of 2018.
Yes, it was a week before Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Yeah, because I had a hunting trip planned with my sons, and that all got screwed up. So
the reason I bring it up is that in the second week of December 2018, the FBI came talking to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, but we'll stay on your story.
Wow.
So I ended up. The FBI knocked on the door. It was a Mar-a-Lago style raid. They didn't, kick in my door. They didn't Roger Stone me. They Mar-a-Lago'd me. All right. They knocked on the door, and and I opened the door, and they said they were with the FBI, asked to see their badges, and they said they wanted to talk to me. And so I let them in, and I knew I had not done anything wrong, at least in terms of breaking the law. And so I was very forthright and open with them about everything, much to my lawyer's chagrin. My lawyer was like, don't you say a word to them about anything. Now, in retrospect, I realize I should not have said anything to them.
Right.
My father told me when I left home, I was one of these kids that never did drugs. I barely took a sip of a beer, when I was a kid. I was a really, law-abiding kid. And my dad tells me on my last day at home, on the way out the door, he goes, son, this is the last piece of advice I got to give you. If you're ever arrested for anything, he says, I don't care if they catch you with a murder weapon in your hand. You don't say anything. And I'm looking at him like, what kind of faith do you have in me, Dad? What do you think I'm going to do?
Hey, but it was good advice.
Well, you're right, but I didn't listen to it. So, but I ended up letting him in, and this one agent in particular who was leading the investigation, he played good cop, of course, and was asking me all these questions, and I told him right at the front, as soon as they came in the door, I said, hey, just so you know, I'm a protected whistleblower with the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act. And I told him, and because he said, we're here about a thumb drive. And I said, yeah. I said, I know what you're talking about. I blew the whistle on, and I took the thumb drive, and I did this, and I told him everything. I mean, I laid it all out. Now, I didn't have the thumb drive anymore at that point. I had moved everything onto an SD card so that I could lock it down and harden it. And
just to make it smaller?
Yeah, make it smaller profile. Also, there were some tools that I wanted to make sure that was encrypted, hard encrypted.
Wow.
And so, because my thinking was if anybody ever got their hands on this, it's classified information.
But isn't that cloning it and copying it? That's allowed?
Well, no, not a matter of being allowed at this point. I mean, they had only asked me for printed copies, and so I figured any copy that I would give would be printed copies. But, I had an SD card.
Well, what's an SD card for people who might not know?
It's like what you would put in a camera,
Secure digital, it's like the size of a postage stamp and very thin.
Right. So at the time, there was I wanted to make a copy that would be hard, it would have encryption basically built in, and
so if somebody gets it, they can't just open it up.
Exactly.
That's actually very smart. It should be that way to begin with.
Yeah, and I destroyed the original thumb drive once I had that. So he kept asking me about a thumb drive. Did I have the thumb drive? My answer was no. I wasn't lying to him.
True, yeah.
But when they came downstairs, and they held me, they detained me in the living room while they went through every room of the house.
In front of your family?
My only person that was there was my autistic son.
Wow.
And my autistic son, the only thing he remembers was that they all had guns and I did not.
Wow.
In fact, the very first thing that they did was they asked me if I had any guns, and I said yes. And so he took, so he asked me to show them to him. And so I went back and, went back to my safe, which was kept in our walk-in closet, opened it up, and he asked me to hand him my guns. Now, I didn't think about this at the time. I just complied. But, that was a total violation of FBI rules, because the moment I picked up my guns, they could have shot me dead.
Wow.
And said, oh, he had a gun in his hand.
Wow.
What do you expect?
Right.
So really, really bad. And, but I did hand them all my guns. They took all my guns and zip tied them, wrote the serial numbers down on them. So I own none of those guns anymore. I sold all of them because there's no way I want, they don't have a right to know what serial numbers I have. But I had, they did that, and they kept them all by the front door and kept me, they separated me from my phone, separated me from, any guns. And so then they started interrogating me and asking me all these questions, and I'm just being honest and telling them everything. And then later, they moved. One of the things that bothered me later was I found out they had gone through my wife's personal journals.
That's
wow.
Now I have never even gone through. I've never read any of my wife's personal journals. I mean, these are like her personal prayer journals, like when her and I have gotten in fights and when we've had words and stuff, and she's written down things, that she would never say in public, but just her own personal thoughts about things. And so there was things like that occurred, and we know because she had certain thumb pages in there and stuff like that were folded, it was all messed up and changed.
Wow.
And but there were a couple of items that they took that were kind of interesting. They took all of my electronics, like any electronics that I had, computers, laptops, thumb drives, you name it, they took it.
Nintendo?
No,
probably would, though, because
on that note though, that was something that they forgot, and I couldn't believe it. I thought later, man, that would be the place to store that. my son had a game system, and it had SD cards in it.
Yes, it has memory.
And I was like, they left that? What the hell? So
they're stupid. They would take that now because it also has chat apps and the
right,
games
right.
and stuff.
But they ended up, they took two other things that were interesting. They took a copy of a book that Bill Still had signed and given to me,
Ooh.
which told me they were listening to the conversations that I was having with Bill Still. And then the other thing that they did was they also took a flyer that was like underneath my daughter's bed that we had gone down to a walk-away. There was a walk-away movement. Yeah, Brandon Straka, my sister-in-law, was a former, leftist who walked away and woke up to the reality of how corrupt the Democrats were. And
they jammed him up with January 6th.
Yeah. So we went down there to support her, and somebody had handed us a flyer for a Tea Party movement thing, and they took this flyer that was just sitting there, about a Tea Party. So it to me was telling because it told me they were clearly trying to associate me with some sort of anti-government movement or something like that. Yeah, which is ridiculous because the Tea Parties, all they want is they want less taxes and less government. It's like, I'm all for that. But it was weird that they took that. It told me, kind of led me to believe the kind of case they were going after with me. So after that, they finally left, and it was grueling. Actually, I think it was like 9 hours that they were at the house, and I asked them if I could use my phone. I called my wife first and said, don't come home, because I didn't want her coming home and being subject to being searched.
Right.
And I told her, it's just better you stay away until they're done. And then I told.
Were they listening to you on the phone?
Yes.
And how'd they react to you telling her not to come?
They didn't.
It's interesting.
Were they young guys, or were they?
Most of them were probably
20s and 30s and 40s?
Probably. There was probably a couple of guys that looked like they were in their late 20s and mid 30s, and then the one guy I think was probably like in his early 40s maybe.
Right.
And then there was a couple of females also. Ultimately, there were 16. So the first was just 4 guys. 16. And then they got on the phone, and then they had 16 agents that were around the corner, and they all came. And once he served me the search warrant, so after I told him everything, then he goes, I'm here with a search warrant, so we're going to search your house. And so, because he asked me, to hand over the thumb drive, I said I don't have a thumb drive anymore. And so then they searched the house, and they came down, and then they did the inventory with me. Now they gave me the first page of the search warrant, but they did not give me the Schedule B, which is what tells you what they're authorized to take.
Really? Isn't that a violation?
It is, and I actually had to have my defense attorney threaten them to get it. And so finally I did get a copy of it, and there were things they took that weren't on there.
Of course.
So that's why, it didn't have that. And it
That's
also,
outrageous.
yeah. And
the
so
whole case should go away as a result of that.
Yeah. Well, eventually it did.
Right.
And so this senior agent, he played nice and everything. He tried to get me to give him the passwords to everything. And I told him, I said, look, because originally he was asking for the password to the government laptop that I had. I had a government issued laptop.
Isn't that classified?
I told him I can't give you that. I said I've signed a non-disclosure agreement. I said, but here's the phone number of the admin.
Yeah,
you can call him and then they can get you in. And he said, and he started getting mad, angry with me. And so I told him at that point, I said, look, I have an attorney. I've been advised by my attorney not to say anything more. And so, so they left. Remember, he's with all of his other guys at this time, so he's not going to do anything illegal at that point. So they left. He calls me on the phone the next day and starts pressuring me to give him, the PIN number to my phone, to which I did because I didn't have anything to hide, but I gave him the PIN number to my phone, and then I immediately regretted it. And then he says, well, how about you give me the and he made this promise, give it, I'll just check it out and make a clone, and then I'll give it back to you. I mean, I had my life on there, every phone number contact, all that, plus I had cryptocurrency, about $20,000 worth, and I didn't, and I didn't have the what do you call it, the seeds. I didn't have the seeds, and so
they took your crypto.
So they had everything on there on my phone, and when I got my phone back a couple months ago, my phone was sawed in half and everything. What?
Yeah, your crypto's gone.
Yeah.
Physically cut in half.
Yeah.
That's outrageous.
So I don't know how much money I lost, because at the time it was worth, you know, about 20,000, and, you know, would have depended on when I got out of it, or,
Wow.
you know, could have been worth a lot more or maybe some less. I don't know, but
They stole your money.
they did, and so so they ended up. Yeah, he took everything, and he's on the phone. He's telling me, you know, I want to know what the password is to the, you know, government laptop, and I told him, I said, well, I can't give that to you. And he said, you will give it to me. And I said, no. I said, I will not. I said, that is a government property, and I have not been authorized to give you that password. However, why are you asking me for this? You just go to the government; they'll give it to you.
Right.
And so he then threatened me and said, you know, well, you know, you're going to make things harder for yourself. And so he ends up asking me for the laptop, my password to my laptop. And at this point, I'm like, you know what? I'm done cooperating.
Right.
I don't think I should probably be, you know, talking with you. I already gave you my lawyer's number. I don't know why you're calling me.
Yeah, that's a violation.
And that
right
was
there.
a violation too. And when I told my attorney about it, he was outraged.
Right.
Because he totally violated the you know, their rules, because I'd given them my attorney's number and said, this is who I want you to talk to from now on.
Right.
I don't want you talking to me. And yet then he went around, you know, around that, and then contacted me directly. So then I ended up getting a call from my attorney about, I don't know, maybe 8 days later or something, and there was a reporter that had reached out to him from the Daily Caller, and I think Richard Pollock.
Richard Pollock, I know him well.
Yeah, so Richard had...
He's a good guy, actually.
Yeah, he is. And Richard had found, you know, I guess...
Yeah, he did a story about it.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, I didn't know this, but I guess that, you know, media people have spies in each other's, you know, agencies. And so he contacted my lawyer and said, hey, I have word that, I don't remember if it was Washington Times or Washington Post, or who, you know, New York Times or Washington Post or whatever, but he said, you know, these guys are going to do a hit piece on your client.
Ooh.
And he says, I got word of this. Do you want to give me an exclusive and get your side out first? And so my lawyer calls me up and says, well, he says, I usually despise the media, and so I don't like giving, you know, media interviews, but in this case, I think it's probably the wise thing, he says, for him to give, you know, an interview on my behalf. And so he agreed to an interview, and the next, like, it went out like at midnight or something, because like the next day it was in all the news, all over. I mean, international news. You know, it was all over the major news. And I just remember waking up, and I think I was in shock, because you got to remember, for 20-something years, I had 2 people follow me on Twitter. And the only reason I even had a Twitter account was I didn't like Twitter. The only reason I had an account was because I wanted to see what crazy thing Trump was going to say to, you know, to you know, to tick off, you know, the left. And you know, it was like my daily comedy routine.
Well, then what happened after the interview? 2 went to...
Well, it went to like 40,000 overnight.
There you go.
And then I had everybody in media trying to contact me. I think it was pretty much everybody from Fox News wanted me on, you know, including Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Martha McCallum, the Fox 5 or whatever. I mean, they were all reaching out. My lawyer did agree to, you know, he advised on, you know, Sean Hannity, because Sean Hannity doesn't edit. Right. It's just live, and, you know, and so he said that would probably be better. And so, you know, I was going to go do that, but the top came down and said, you know,
at Fox.
Yeah, at Fox, the leadership of Fox canceled it
this guy on.
right before I was supposed to go on.
They love that.
And they said the reason that they canceled it was due to the George Bush Sr.'s funeral was that day, and it was going longer. But they had other stuff on. They had other stuff on, like they had some children's thing on there, you know, that was like ridiculous, and everybody was pissed. But you know. But then by the weekend rolled around, because that was supposed to be on a Friday, and the weekend rolled around, and then my, you know, different things that, you know, happened. The company I was working for said, look, if you stay out of the media, we'll pay you, you know, leave with pay. And so I said, all right. So when they called back, say, hey, you know, we want to have him on again, I was like, no, sorry, you know, my circumstances have changed. I'm not willing to talk to the media. And so I kind of went silent for about a year, but this agent kept investigating me, and he ended up going. I got a phone call from my second oldest son had gone through, you know, a bad divorce, You know, he kind of had one of those rock star marriages right out of high school, and of course it ended badly.
Right.
And his ex-father-in-law calls me up and says, Nate, he says, the FBI was here at my house, and
Whoa.
I was being interrogated by them. And he says, and there's some things that, you know, this guy was saying that, you know, it just went down a weird, you know,
Sure.
went down a weird way. And he says, and I told the guy to, you know, to go pound sand.
That's a good ex-in-law.
And he told me, and the guy basically was asking him, like, you know, have you ever seen, you know, Mr. Cain, saying anti-government stuff? Have you ever seen him, you know, with his guns, you know, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, has he ever talked to you about anything, you know, anything classified? And then he goes, and when, you know, the answer was no to all of that. And he goes, have you ever seen him been inappropriate towards his daughter?
Oh, man.
Yeah, and so of course that was when John kind of had it, and he's like, you know what, you can leave. I don't want to talk to you anymore. And so he was a good guy, but he warned me about it. And then, you know, so I don't know what he said to everybody, but he went around to like people in our, you know, the school
Neighbors.
band board,
Bizarre.
neighbors, everything. And then my youngest son, him and I were having some, you know, issues. You know, he was just turned 18. You know, parents go through a lot of times when their kids, you know, at that transition stage.
Right.
You know, I still have rules that I want him to follow, but you know, he's 18, so he doesn't think he needs to follow those rules. And you know, and it ended up with him moving out. And so we were already, you know, having problems. Well, the FBI's listening to all this, so they can hear. They're listening to all my phone calls, so they know how to push buttons and how they know what, you know, what levers to go after.
Go to the son.
They went to my son's girlfriend's parents' house.
Oh, that's outrageous.
While my son was there, while his girlfriend's there, and basically they interrogated them for 6 hours, scaring the hell out of them. The father, the girlfriend's father had a clearance, and he's afraid he's going to lose his clearance for having any association with me. They're making me sound like I'm some, you know, crazed anti-government, you know, gun lover with gun lover with guns all, you know, all over my house, which they were all locked in my safe. You know, but they're telling them this. They're telling them, you know, I wouldn't let, I wouldn't let, your daughter, you know, go anywhere near him. And so, of course, they told my son, you're not allowed, you know, if you want to date our daughter, you can't have anything to do with your dad.
What?
So, yep. So they didn't tell.
But that's what they want to do. They want to put pressure on your family.
They caused division. Later, my son did finally talk with us after about 2 years, because he was so afraid. And he said to me, and
they stole 2 years of your life with your son.
Yep, and more than that, because we're still having issues because of the anxiety and the stress that they caused.
They've changed your relationship with him forever.
And they ended up, you know, he told me, though, in that brief moment where we had kind of gotten back together, he told me that they tried to get him to wear a wire against me.
What?
Yeah. My own son.
But you said the brief moment, so you're now estranged from him
yeah,
again.
we're still estranged.
So the FBI has destroyed
They've
your
destroyed
family.
they've destroyed a relationship with my son. Yes.
Well, not just your son, it seems. I mean,
no, they've damaged. I mean, my kids now. You know, I've got 2 of my kids I think have anxiety. Actually, all 3 of them.
Yeah.
None of them had this problem before.
The FBI is evil, Nate.
But my oldest son, who has autism, he said he remembered seeing, you know, FBI agents with their gun safety off.
Ooh, ready to shoot.
Yeah, and so, you know, this is the thing with him. He notices things that most people don't know because of his autism, and he said that scared him because he saw all my guns, you know, zip tied,
and they're about
and sees all these guys with guns, you know, many of them with it off safety, you know, and in my living room, you know, surrounding me, and he had paranoia and feelings of like, you know, threatening feelings, feeling like, you know, that I was gonna be assassinated somewhere.
Wow.
You know, it was crazy. So this guy eventually, I got sick and tired of being, you know, pushed around by this guy, and I went down and I met with Lindsey Graham, who had just taken over the judiciary as the chairman of the judiciary, and I met with his senior investigative staff. 2 weeks later, all this harassment stopped, and that FBI agent, as far as I know, was no longer an agent.
Are you able to say what that FBI agent's name was? You don't have to.
I won't say his name.
Because he's just going to come bother you more.
Well, it's not so much that. It's just that I don't know what this guy was told, who he was working for, why he was doing what he was doing. I don't think it would be
Maybe
just...
it's not his fault.
Yeah, and just like it's not fair, you know, for me to be accused of something without, you know, proof or evidence, I don't want to do that to him.
You're a very unique and impressive man.
Right. Let's do this because I know you're pressed for time, and you've told us so much interesting and valuable information, most of which would lead the ordinary American to say, I'm checking out. You know,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and yet,
Well, I thought I was.
but yet you're not doing that. And
No.
More engaged.
maybe we could just spend, if I just
Sure,
we
yeah,
just
yeah.
spend a few minutes, however many you may have,
Yeah.
explaining to the public what you now intend to do.
All right. So,
if the electorate will let you do it.
well, two and a half years ago, we decided, we can't live in this house anymore. I mean, I didn't know if the house was bugged. I didn't know, what my neighbors thought about me. I mean, it was a horrible feeling, and there was too many painful memories associated with that house. So we sold it, and we moved here to West Virginia. For one thing, I tried to get a concealed carry because I got poisoned. I had people following me.
Poisoned?
Oh yeah.
What was that?
So I was working down in Washington D.C. I had done an interview, and somebody had asked me if I was going to write a book, and I said, yeah, I'm working on a book. And it was about maybe 3 days or 4 days later, I went down to my car, which was in an underground parking garage that's open to the public. Anybody can walk in, no cameras anywhere. And I walked in, grabbed my door handle to open my car, and there was something wet under my door handle. And I didn't think anything at the time. I just thought gross, and wiped off my hand, got in my car, started driving. But I ended up in the emergency room about 3 hours later with stroke symptoms.
Did they know what the poison was? I mean,
No, but I
must
had
have been Putin, right?
But I had, yeah, right. But I had every conceivable test done: MRI with and without contrast. I had an EEG. I mean, because I went to the emergency room, they didn't have the equipment there other than an MRI, and they did one type of scan, but I still had symptoms that lasted for 6 weeks.
That's horrible.
And so I had ataxia. I couldn't walk in a straight line. I had speech slurring, and they did all the tests. Honestly, I think what saved my life is I was taking a supplement at the time that was a vasodilator, and it probably kept me alive, kept me from having a stroke. But eventually, I ended up deciding, that I'm not ever gonna, probably write a book. It's just not worth it. And but I have done a number of interviews, and and then I just. Maryland, when I tried to get a concealed carry, they wouldn't give me one. Now, the laws have changed now, but back then they were a May issue state. So I wanted to live somewhere where we could live free, and I didn't have to worry about that. So we moved here, and so now, last summer, and then I think Twitter suspended my account 2021 January, and permanently suspended it. Never told me why. Tried to get it back, they wouldn't give me back, and so I was like, you know what, this is a blessing. And so I went back to being, kind of obscure and not really well known.
Off-grid here.
And I loved it. And actually last summer was the best summer of my life. I mean, we bought a boat. The Lord has blessed us and has returned everything, that has been taken from us. I was making more money now than I made even when I was at the FBI. I started my own company, cybersecurity company. It's been good. The only thing that hasn't been returned to us is our relationship with our son. But other than that, we've been blessed, and I ended up buying a boat, and so I was laying on my boat last summer and just enjoying life and looking up at the sky, and I thought to myself, man, I hope this never ends. This is the life. And I had that still small voice come into my head again that said, son, I'm not done with you yet, so enjoy this while it lasts, but this is just a vacation. I got more work for you to do. Now, I had no idea at the time that that God was going to call me to run for office, but later that year, I guess it was that year, in November, after the last election, I was very distraught over what happened, especially with Arizona and with Pennsylvania, and so I was just, I was praying and asking God to raise up righteous men and women to run for office, and it was at that time, I heard that still small voice again to say, "What about you?" And my first initial reaction was, whoa, hold on a minute. I just got my life. I just got my life back.
Right.
I just passed the 5-year statute of limitations, because they don't tell you when they're done investigating. They just leave it hanging over your head for 5 years.
Right.
Just got my equipment back. Just finally
saw it in half.
Yeah. and And I've got a company that's successful, and this means I'll have to shut it down. It means that, I've got to take a major pay cut. I'm just like, there's no reason for me to want to do this. I don't like being in the, in the media, spectacle. I certainly don't like my family having to deal with it. I don't like Washington, D.C. Most of the time I come back from there, I feel like I need to take a shower just to wash all the scum off of me.
Right.
And so, but I've learned not to say no to God. And so I prayed about it, and I just said, God, I tried to negotiate. That doesn't always work out.
Not gonna work.
He's got a good position.
He does. Yeah, since he knows everything. So I said, all right, God. I said, look, if you want me to run, you need to make a path, because I didn't see one. Because Alex Mooney had just won the election. He was, he's got like the fifth, most conservative voting record, and I'm not going to run up against him. And I said, God, if you open a door and create a path, I'll run. But until then, I'm going to take it that you don't want me to run. And I'm thinking maybe 6 years, 8 years down the road. 2 days later, I'm on Google and I'm typing in Alex Mooney's name because I needed to contact his office about an issue my company is working on. And it drops down, says, Alex Mooney, 2 minutes ago, announces his run for Senate in 2024, against Joe Manchin. And so I was like, oh, man. So this is where, this is what got me into the race. And I really, when I first started, Mel and I realized, we love West Virginia, but we didn't know West Virginia. We know the Eastern Panhandle. So the first thing we did is we drove all 27 counties of the 2nd District, and we started talking to people and getting to know them. And I was amazed at just how many wonderful people there are in the state. Like like I said, I expected being an outsider,
Sure.
that I would be met with, suspicion by everybody, or maybe, bigotry or whatever. And that's not been the case at all. In fact, I've met so many people that have told me, I was a transplant too. And there's so many people that have fled to this state from other places because they wanted the same thing. They wanted freedom. And that's what I see in the hearts of every West Virginian that I meet. Their motto, mountaineers live free. They really do, there's an attitude, a spirit here of a desire for freedom and the government to stay out of their business. And I love that. I meet with so many like little old grandmas from church. And I remember meeting with this lady. She was probably 80-something years old, little old lady. She goes, now son, she goes, what's your position on guns? And I said, oh, I love guns. I said, I'm a big, avid, gun lover. I said, I have a lot of them. She goes, oh, good. She goes, and then she goes on to describe the one that she's packing.
Wow.
And I'm
in
like,
church.
yes. So it was amazing, and I've seen so many, like I said, so many neat people here. The people here, they love God. They love their country. They love their rights. And there's a patriotism here that I know it's in other states too, but it seems like it's here in abundance.
Right.
And so I love being here. And I don't know that I could have ran for office anywhere else, because the people here, they hold the same values as me, and I'm able to be who I am. Where I think a lot of politicians, they have to kind of pretend to be something that they're not. And I don't have to be that here. I am who I am, and and they either accept me or they don't. But I'm running on 3 major pillars. So the first one is the restoration of our rights under the Constitution.
Yes,
I took the oath 3 times, once as an Army soldier and then twice as a civil servant with the Navy and with the Marine Corps, to defend and uphold those rights under the Constitution. And right now we have a government that has become tyrannical.
Yep.
COVID was a huge example to all of us of the lengths that the government will go to try to, restrict our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech. And we're finding out now about all this stuff going on with the Twitter files and, this interview that just happened with Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson, where the FBI, was spying on Americans through Twitter. They were accessing people's DMs. They were, controlling the messaging, telling them which accounts to suspend and paying them $3 million a year to do it.
They could get your GPS location in real
That's
time
right.
from Twitter.
And I tell you, I will tell you, that little bit of information is the tip of the iceberg. Okay, you got to remember, I signed all these non-disclosures.
We're not asking.
Yep, and I can't get into it, but I can tell you it's the tip of the iceberg, and everybody in Congress should be asking.
Yeah.
And so, that is a huge concern to me. The other issue is our defense. Our national security right now is at the weakest I've ever seen it. Of course, I've had a career mostly in the defense, industry, and I know very well, what the threats are against us, especially when it comes to cybersecurity and when it comes to national critical infrastructure. And I'm very concerned about where we are as a country. You have a president that's depleted our national strategic reserve, which is meant for the military.
Petroleum.
It's really meant for so that our ships, our Navy can function, because it costs a lot of money to send these ships out there. Well, if we end up at war with China, it's going to be a naval battle. And I don't know that we have the resources now to defend ourselves, because it'll be over the Straits of Taiwan. That's what it will be about. I'm concerned about all the weapon stockpiles that they're saying now are depleted, that we've sent to, and this came out of that leak, that we've been sending all of our weapons over to, the Ukraine. And of course, we left a whole ton of them in the desert of, Afghanistan. And so, now we have depleted munitions. We've got a military that has been downsized by the tune of 8,000 that they kicked out because they were, and it was illegal according to the IG. This was the DoD IG that just put out a report, but the way that they pushed this out was completely illegal. And so now they've kicked out 8,000 of our best, highly trained, a lot of these are, Special Forces,
Right.
Navy SEALs, you name it. And it's like if you wanted a recipe for how to destroy our national security, the current administration, has been following that recipe. And they've also introduced all of this woke nonsense, this equity,
Diversity,
inclusion.
inclusion,
Yeah, and it's unbelievable. So you've got the U.S. taxpayer paying to supply hormones to transgenders in the military, and the way I look at it is that when somebody, the military's never been about equal opportunity for everybody. It's never been.
Or your personal condition.
Or your personal conditions. In fact, there's a lot of people that don't qualify for the military because they have a disability that makes them unfit for military service. And so, the fact that, you have a military that's being taught to, be sensitive to people's gender pronouns. I'm sorry, but, and I even remember, even a few years back, I remember when I was working with the Navy, and the Navy, the sailors had stress cards that they could hold up, I mean, if you're in combat, you're not going to be able to say, hey, I got a stress card. You're yelling at me, stressing me out, it's just,
Right.
So there's so many things going on that I think are a major concern. And the last thing that I'm running on is prosperity. But that prosperity will not be held for very long if we don't secure, if we don't make sure that we have strong national security, and we don't ensure that our constitutional rights are protected against tyranny. Those are the two threats, against the Constitution, the domestic one and the foreign one. And so to me, those are the two priorities. And then after that, once we've secured those things, then we can ensure that we have opportunities for economic development and growth. And West Virginia is sitting on a gold mine of natural resources. That is something that I want to see happen, where we end up taking, these resources and opening it up and creating the refineries and investing in our own state. A lot of these things aren't things that are done by a congressman. They're done by the state, officials, done by the state delegates and senators and the governor. But certainly you can use the bully pulpit of your position as a congressman to have influence. And I would be pushing for those types of things. I would be pushing to help West Virginia get off of the tit of the federal government. They have to stop being a welfare state. We have all the resources we need to have economic independence. And the fact is where this federal government is going, I don't know, that it's sustainable.
It's not.
And I think that if we start doing things now, we may be able to provide a better future and a better hope for West Virginia, but it's going to mean that we have to get ourselves to a level of economic independence, that will secure our future. So those are the I would say the pillars of what I'm running on.
Well, Nate, it is such an honor to be here with you. I know you're pressed for time, and Jason, I really appreciate your time and your focus. There's a road ahead for you, and I think the audience is just getting to know you. I hope a lot more people will get to know you. I hope West Virginia will benefit from your service. America will benefit from your service. Thank you for doing what you've done to protect all of us. I'm sorry that it's cost you so much for your family, and I hope that the wider world is going to learn from this and not rise up violently, but demand an accounting from our federal government and the tyrannical impulses that we seem displayed. It has to happen. Thank you for running. Thank you for all your sacrifices, and thank you for welcoming us into your home.
Thank you for having me, and